Welcome everyone to the latest episode of a series I like to call History Speaks. Now on today's show I'm delighted to welcome a lady whose passion is for feminist theatre in the early 20th century, and she also enjoys studying early actresses and performances from this era. She's also recently defended her PhD theory on the relationship of history and feminism in wartime drama. So let's now open the curtains to my guest today, Vivian Colbert. Hi Vivian, how are you?
Hi, John. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
It's not a problem. I'm looking forward to this one. It's not every day you get to talk about theatre and actors and actresses and stuff from history, so it should be good. But to start us off, imagine this. We've arrived on opening night. It's your chance to star. So has your enthusiasm ever led you to want to be on the stage? And if so, what type of show would you like to be considered for? Maybe a drama, a musical, or a comedy?
Oh, they'd all be great. Actually, I think I've already performed in my favorite part. So in high school, when we did A-levels, we prepared a little play for our graduation party, and I got the role of Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust. So I got to play the devil, and I really enjoyed it. It was the best part in the play, and yeah.
Well, there you go. So you have had some experience on stage then?
Yes, some amateur experience.
You've never thought about doing that in later life then, sort of amateur dramatics and things like that?
I did actually for a while. I even considered at some point becoming an actress. However, I felt it wasn't the right stage in my life, and I've also been drawn to doing research and had to decide what I would like to do most, and ended up doing my research instead. So
okay, well that's fine. I mean, that's fine. Yeah, it's everybody does their own thing, don't they? And whatever draws you to what you want to do, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. But my first question, which I ask all my guests, is, how did you first become interested in history, and what's your background?
I think it started very early in my life, but I settled on history being my passion during my teens. I've always been very fascinated with these exemplary female characters of history. I've always been drawn to exceptional figures like queens or actresses. They've always been part of my passions. And eventually I had teachers who encouraged me to do more in those regards, and also to include my interests in my academic work, you might say. And yes, it somehow went up from there. So then I started doing a teacher's degree myself here in Germany, and ended up studying history for that. And there I again had teachers, great teachers, one professor in particular who encouraged me to do again more with my passion, and he encouraged me to do my PhD. And my supervisor then encouraged me to work with these great women that I love and admire. And yes,
it is. I think history is fascinating, no matter what era you kind of
yes,
whether it's through an educational or as a fan or whatever. It's just so interesting. It really is. And but anyway,
what I really love about history is also the different narratives. And once you look at history in its constructive character, how you can just dismantle it and form different stories and find these different people and their voices in history. That's really something I love.
If you go back to 500 years or so, it's incredible how everything has changed. So from what it was then to what it is now, I mean, you could yes, literally spend the whole of your life just looking at that period then thinking, wow, you know what I mean? It's massive changes.
Exactly. Yeah, there were massive changes, but then again, there were also things that did not change as much. So that's also interesting.
I don't think it's so much the human beings changed. I think it's the way technology's changed and the way we've learned things over that period of time that's really changed. But it's fascinating how historical moments and works have been used to inspire and drive social change. Now, we're going to get into this theatre stuff. And A Pageant of Great Women was written by Cicely Hamilton. who performed it across the country between 1909 and 1912. And this was used to attract women into suffrage. Now, what do you know about this period of time and this particular drama or play?
Well, during the suffrage movement in general, theatre became a very important tool to advance the suffrage cause. So it was very important to reach an audience, to inspire empathy and to provoke thought, critical thinking within the audience. Also to capture the audience and oftentimes mirror social disadvantages women faced on stage with the women of society. So it was very important. And the pageant of great women is a very good example if you want to look at how the suffrage movement used historical figures, especially historical women, to advance their cause by using these examples and showing society that, in fact, the discrimination women suffer from is unfounded, because there have been women all throughout history who have proven that women can be just as powerful, just as intelligent and clever as men.
And I think that's probably more so today, because you see women in roles today that for many years were categorized as men-only jobs.
Yes.
So even like an airline pilot, for example, something like that. It's something that women are now into, and and all power to them, really, because they are capable of doing jobs that men are. I'm not saying every job. Maybe they won't want to be a bricklayer or something like that, but
well, there sure are women also who want to do that, and men as well. So basically the idea at all to restrict people due to their gender, what they are suited for and what not, is, if you think about it in detail or closely, it's quite ridiculous, actually.
So exploring the impact of those performances then, and how powerful theatre could be as a tool for, say, social change, it's also fascinating, I guess, to consider the kind of stories and roles that were brought to life on stage during this time. Now, these plays were predominantly made up of women, but also revealed double standards that women of the time faced. Now, what type of dramatic roles would these stories portray?
Well, usually really just they reflected circumstances of the women of the early 20th century. And I feel like the suffragettes or suffrage theatre in general also was very clever in using historical narratives to do that. For example, if you look at the play Pains and Penalties by Lawrence Houseman, which he wrote for the suffrage movement, and it's about the trial of Queen Charlotte, and it was George IV, I think. It's a play about a woman who's being treated unjustly because her husband wants to divorce her, and she has to fight publicly for her rights and for her social standing as well. So these are cases or dramas that reflect what women had to go through every day during that time and before as well. So just everyday scenes, actually, that were reflected on stage through plays, through different characters.
And it must have been quite difficult, I guess, for them to get those shows public, because of the differences in perception between, men wanting women to stay in a certain place, but women obviously wanted to go to a different place. It must have been quite hectic at times, I guess, getting people to come to these things and not face any, anger or maybe trouble outside. Or
actually, the suffrage movement often had to perform their plays in private settings, so they were not performed on public stages like any theatre in London, for example. They were often on private stages and with a guest list most times. That's also due to limitations due to the what was it called? The Lord Chamberlain. He censored the plays at the time. So you needed a license by the Lord Chamberlain. That's the word I was looking for. They were often not granted licenses for their plays, so they had to perform in private.
So I guess they were kind of preaching to the converted then in one way by doing.
Yes.
They were doing it that way.
Yes, the converted, but also the interested, the curious. I don't think it was too difficult to get invited or to be accepted among the guest list. But of course, the audience was already probably very sympathetic to the cause when they joined.
Yeah, and it does highlight the challenges and expectations of the time, I guess. Now, and it's interesting to consider how the theatre itself became a platform for broader social and political statements. Now, Julie Hollidge, a British actor and director, wrote that Votes for Women heralded the beginning of a suffrage theatre. How powerful do you think that comment was at the time?
Well, it reflects very well how innovative the suffrage movement was by using these plays to transport not only their political cause, but also an entertaining value and an educational value. So producing a good play or a good drama for stage, you have to consider a lot of factors, different factors, for it to be a success. And the suffrage movement really had the talent to always hit a spot with their plays, at least with their famous plays. So they had compelling storylines, they had interesting characters that were easy to be empathized with, but they also had these very deep and insightful messages hidden in their stories. Yeah.
So no, go on. Sorry.
The suffrage movement in general can be considered very theatrical. So I wouldn't say that theater or drama was limited to the stage for the suffrage movement. It was also brought to the public through pageantry and iconography and their newspapers. Any ways you can reach the public at the time, but there's always something very staged and very crafty about it. And not in a sense that it was faked, but it's they knew how to catch attention and how to capture interest.
I guess at the time as well, it was a war of words because what they believed against what they obviously didn't want to happen. They were looking for a power that women could behold, if you like, and move forward as part of a wider community, not just a male-dominated one. But it was, exactly. I guess, it was a bold statement, and it did highlight that transformative power of theatre during that particular era. And it's fascinating how individuals, through their creative talents, have left such a lasting impact on cultural and social history. So we're going to talk about somebody else here. And I think this particular lady is quite amusing. But what first sparked your interest in Clemence Dane, aka Winifred Ashton, a lady who excelled in writing plays and was eventually awarded a CBE in 1953 as well?
Yeah, and she also won an Academy Award in the 40s.
Yes, I didn't mention that, but yes, she did.
Yes, Clemence Dane, she was the first playwright I've settled on for my PhD thesis. Because she is so fascinating. She's so versatile. She started out as a teacher herself, then she became an actress, then she was a sculptor in between, and then of course she was a writer, but for all kinds of variety of texts. She did not only do plays, she also wrote novels, other works of fiction. She worked for the radio, she wrote film scripts. So she was really just versatile, and I really admire that about her, because she knew how to constantly reinvent herself, but also remain this one unique person that she was. Something else that sparked my interest about her was her obvious admiration for Queen Elizabeth I, which I share. So it felt like I was meeting somebody on a common ground here. And of course, the play I've analyzed for my PhD thesis, Will Shakespeare, it features Queen Elizabeth very much, and it also the part of her character in the play is very unique in its writing. So yeah, it was like meeting somebody.
She was seriously a jack of all trades, wasn't she? Really?
Yes, yes.
And I've got this story that I've done a little bit of reading about her, and whether it's naivete or whatever it is, she had a way with words. We'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. And the story is, she invited Noel Coward to lunch during the war, and apparently food was quite difficult. And she spoke to him over the phone, and she said to him, "Do come, I've got such a lovely cock." And Noel replied, "I do wish you'd call it a hen." And that just, whether that's a slight naivete or it's just a way of coming across, it's I don't know, it's funny today when you hear it. It's funny.
It is, but it also reflects her wit. She was incredibly witty in her writing. You can see that especially in plays like Will Shakespeare, and you can also, she's also written a feminist manifest in 1926, which was quite impressive. And again, she's eloquent. She knows how to use her words
There's another quote as well, when she was asked to describe herself as being full of life and creative energy. She said she was randy. Which again, it's like, you don't know whether it's like just completely ridiculous or she's saying these words, for a reason, but It is amusing, and it's I guess in one way you could think, well, she's clever. She knows what words to use and how to get a message across in a way that people are probably just not expecting her to say.
Yeah, it also makes people listen. I mean,
yeah.
If you say that, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Suddenly you're interested. You're hooked.
I mean, even today, if somebody said some of those things to you, you'd probably go, what? But anyway, that's just the way it was. But exploring, I guess, what drew you to such a remarkable figure offers a great insight into your appreciation for creative brilliance, which clearly she had. Now, it's interesting to see how another iconic name might have captured your fascination. I'll take my tongue out, or my teeth, or whatever. Might have captured your fascination in a similar way. Now, Bernard Shaw is another one of your favourites, an Irish legend, a critic, an activist. What was it about him that you found fascinating?
Bernard Shaw was actually one of the last playwrights I've included in my list. And it started for me with reading St. Joan, his play that I've analyzed. And I liked that play so much. And then I read the preface to the play, which is about 100 pages long. It's incredible. And yeah, I really liked what I read there. So I decided to give him a chance. My relationship with him has always been ambivalent because I was never sure what to make of him. I think he was a bit of an unreadable person, especially in regards to feminism, which was of course very important for me, for my study, to keep in mind and to include in my research. So he's a difficult person in that regard, but he was also extremely brilliant as a playwright. And what he did with St. Joan, it's such an incredible play. And also not only from an artistic point of view, but also from a historian's point of view, because the amount of research he put into that and how he translated that for the stage, which is very, very difficult. I mean, her life wasn't long, but we're still talking about quite a period of time when we think of Joan of Arc, and how do we put all of that with all the important aspects on a stage play? That's very difficult to translate history onto stage. But yeah, I think he was a master of his craft.
It's very clearly a very intellectual man, very deep-minded as well. He wrote once in the New York Times saying that he was talking about militant Irish nationalism, which was a big thing back then. And he said, like, total independence, and he asserted was impractical. An alliance with a bigger power, preferably England, was essential. And it was later that month that the Dublin Easter Rising took place, and it obviously took him completely by surprise after making that statement. So that's one thing about him, I guess. He was always thinking the possibility of bringing maybe people together or bringing situations together to form a conclusion. It's similar, I guess, in writing a story or a play or anything like that. You've got to have, a beginning, a middle and an end, and bring it all together so public can understand what you're saying and what you're writing. But the other incredible thing about him is he lived into his mid-90s, which is incredible, even by today's standards. And possibly, and this really threw me a little bit, he fell from a tree while pruning it, and that led to his death, which is quite a silly way to die when you've gone through 90 odd years. And it's quite an incredible story that he actually fell from a tree while pruning, which ultimately led to his death in his mid-90s. But why was he pruning a tree in his mid-90s? I mean,
yeah, but you could also look at it in a way that how incredible is it that he managed to get onto a tree in his mid-90s?
Yeah,
so,
it is incredible.
Very impressive.
He's very, like I say, a very impressive guy, and one that'll be remembered for years to come. He's not just going to disappear.
Yeah.
Let's talk then about a British writer, Naomi Royde Smith, who published not only novels and biographies, but also plays. What do you know about her?
She too was a very career-oriented woman. Something that's very significant about her is that in the very early 20th century, she became the literary editor for the Westminster Gazette. So she was a trailblazer in that regard herself already. And then, of course, she, in her work or in her job, she already advanced women very much. So she was very much for publishing works by lesser known women and encouraged them to publish with her publishing house. She later on, she got married, but she never had children, and she kept on working. Also very impressive for the interwar period. Certainly wasn't the status quo. And of course, her writings were very interesting. She had these sapphic touches. When she, for example, wrote The Tortoiseshell Cat, there's the story of a lesbian vamp in there, which is quite curious and also allows us as researchers to think that maybe, well, at least sexuality was an important topic for herself, and maybe it also reflected in some way her own person. And then the play I've been working with by her was Mrs. Siddons, about Sarah Siddons, a very impressive historical figure herself. And Naomi, she was also quite smitten by Siddons. I mean, maybe a bit similar to Clement Staines' fascination with Queen Elizabeth, but not as much probably. Anyway, she's also written a very long biography about Sarah Siddons a couple of years after the play was published. And I feel, well, the play itself, it wasn't the best of plays. There was room for improvement. It was also only performed once for a charity event. But still, there's much potential there. And what I find very intriguing about the play and how Naomi wrote Mrs. Siddons is how well it reflects this double life an actress had to lead and probably still has to in today's day and age. How she had to balance being this public figure, a working woman in the public, and then at the other side, she also had to be this perfect wife, because she had chosen a profession that is linked to prostitution. So actresses were often considered very loose women, and Sarah Siddons had to really fight against that during her time. And she worked hard on her image, which we can still see in the legacy of portraits and other works of art that are left behind of her. Yeah, and I think the play, or Naomi Royde Smith, really crossed this balance Sarah Siddons had to deal with, even if she did not make a good play out of it. But
it's just the way it is, isn't it? There's one.
yeah.
We'll talk about Sarah Siddons a little bit later, but there's one piece of information, and you probably know this. She had, she met this guy called Walter de la Mare, and he was married, but he wrote over 400 love letters to Naomi over a 5-year period, yet he had no intention of leaving his family. And I find that, that's just incredible. So I don't know why I would write 400 love letters to somebody and yet have no intention of maybe trying to, go to the next level, if you like.
Yes, it's true. It's curious. But I also feel like we often consider Sarah Siddons one of the first modern actresses. And if we think about modern acting and what all the things it entails, including a very active fan culture. If we think about it that way, and how many celebrities, especially actors and actresses, get confessions of admiration and love by fans all over the world. I wonder if these are also, or could be considered early stages of this modern concept of fan culture.
It could well be, and it's something I didn't at the time think in that type of way, but yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. It does make more sense when you put it like that than it does to think that he just wrote 400 love letters. It just seems ridiculous. So
of course,
could have just had a crush on her. We don't know.
Yes, of course. Can be just as reasonable. Also, 400 letters is quite a number. So it doesn't matter what his intentions were. It's a bit too much, probably.
It's a lot to think. Let's move on to somebody else, and this is somebody called Elizabeth McIntosh. Now, she had 2 different pen names, Josephine Tay, I think it's pronounced, and Gordon Davio. Why do you think she had these pen names?
Well, that's very difficult to answer because we don't know. Well, we can't say for sure. I would say it has a lot to do with privacy. She wasn't, other than the other playwrights I've been looking at, Daviet didn't seek the public as much as the others would. She led a very private life back in Scotland in Inverness, where she took care of her father. So I think it may be a way for her to just to be a private person, but to also have her profession as a writer. And in the story of Gordon Daviet, I really love that little detail because when she wrote her play, Richard of Bordeaux, and she wrote it for John Gielgud specifically, and she sent him a copy of the script and he liked it, and they started corresponding about it, making changes, editing stuff. And he never knew that he was conversing with a woman until he met her, which was a couple of months after they started their correspondence. And well, he was quite surprised, of course, because she was not what he was expecting. It didn't change anything about their relationship, though. So it remained a very good working relationship between them. But I love that story because, it just goes to show, how nobody would doubt a man doing something brilliant, whereas.
I know exactly what you mean. And I was gonna come on to that about the friendship with John Gielgud anyway. Now I know you've just touched on the fact that Elizabeth McIntosh had these pen names, etc. But one of her ambitions was to write a play for London's West End, Richard of Bordeaux, which I know you just mentioned. And it was a success. It ran for a year. But a friendship with John Gielgud obviously proved much more significant. Well, what more do we know about their collaborations?
Well, first of all, like I said, she wrote the play with Gielgud in mind. So in that regard, I always like to think of their relationship starting as any fangirl's dream, writing a play for your favorite actor, and he not only starring in it, accepting it, but also working with you on the play itself. Gielgud not only played the part of Richard II, the main the title role of Richard of Bordeaux, but he also was the director of the play. So he was very much involved in the whole process of getting it all on stage. Their relationship did not transgress much further beyond the play. So this is really the peak or the height of their relationship working together on Richard of Bordeaux, but they both profited a lot from the success of Richard of Bordeaux. So Gielgud, we know he became a household name in England, Great Britain on stage, and later on also in television and film. And for Deviate, or whatever we want to call her, I refer to her as Deviate because that's the name she used for the play. It was the peak of her theatre career. And she continued to write other plays as well, but never as successful as Richard of Bordeaux. But one other relationship that came out of this play, and which is also quite significant, was between Deviate and Gwen Franken Davies. Gwen Franken Davies played Anne of Bohemia, Richard's wife. And both these characters were very outstanding in the play. So they really made the play special, I think, Richard and Anne. Also their performers, of course, Gielgud and Franken Davies. But Gwen and Gordon, they became really close friends. They would spend a lot of time together, also outside of the theatre world. And she wrote another play for Gwen. She wrote Queen of Scots for Gwen Franken Davies, which was not nearly as successful as Richard of Bordeaux for a variety of reasons. One of which would be maybe that Deviate wasn't as interested in Mary Queen of Scots as she was in Richard II, but still, it was still a good play. But this is a friendship or a dynamic that really, really caught my interest as well. Also, in consideration that both Gielgud and Franken Davies, they were both queer characters or queer people, or even homosexuals, both of them were. So Gielgud, we know that, or I think you know probably, that he was gay, which was confirmed later in his life. And Gwen Franken Davies actually lived quite openly in her lesbian relationship, or as open as she could at the time. One thing was she was completely accepted by her family, she and her partner. We have letters between her and her mother from the 1920s, which obviously acknowledged that she's living with another woman, and that woman is part of the family. So she's not living with her best friend or a roommate, but she's living with that woman. And somehow Deviate ended up in this scene with these people, and we do not know anything about Deviate's personal life or her own sexuality or anything about it, but I don't know, it just gives us an idea of what kind of person she probably was, that she was a very tolerant and open person, maybe even queer herself, we do not know, but yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic that grew out of play.
It must have been really exciting for her to pull off a coup like getting John Gielgud to appear in that play. It must have been, because he was like, he was and he still is an acclaimed actor, a very distinguished actor, if you like. One interesting thing about her, after her death, and you may know this, you may not, and if you don't, I don't, it's one of those things. All the proceeds from her estate, including royalties, were all assigned over to the National Trust, which is a rare gift, and now obviously one of national importance. I mean, that's quite an incredible thing to give over everything to a charity, I guess, and they'll look after them for eternity. So I don't know. It's interesting. I just thought it was interesting that she'd done that. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if you have heard about that at all.
I don't know anything about the details at the moment, but what I know is that she was, after her father died, and I think she died pretty soon after him, or I'm not sure about it. Sorry, but either way, there wasn't much family left, or any at all. So, yeah, I think it's a noble gesture.
It is. It's quite a rare thing for anybody to do, I think, especially in her position, I guess. But anyway, let's move on to somebody else who you mentioned earlier, Lawrence Haussmann. Initially known for his artist skills, he turned to, this is fascinating for me, he turned to writing when his eyesight started to fail. Now, what inspiring qualities do you think he had then?
What I like about him, like Shaw, he was a Victorian originally, and I think part of that never left him really. He would later write the play Victoria Regina, which eventually became the basis of the tradition of how Queen Victoria and her relationship to Prince Albert is being perceived by media. So even if we watch the latest shows about Queen Victoria, there are traces going back to Lawrence Haussmann's original play about her. And I find what makes him special in that regard is that he wrote about somebody, a very historical and important female figure, which he actually met himself twice, and not met, but he saw her for real. And that makes him outstanding among the playwrights I've chosen for my thesis, first of all, but also as a person himself, he was quite, because even though he was a Victorian and there are these traces in his character that are very Victorian, feel like very Victorian, he still was a very progressive thinker. He was a feminist, a real feminist. So other than Shaw, we do not have to doubt about his feminism. So he was modern, but also not. He was also Victorian. That's quite intriguing about him, yeah.
His qualities, I guess, they give us a deeper sense of his character and his determination. But it's intriguing to consider, I suppose, how his values shaped his actions during such a pivotal time in history. And we know, as you touched on then, that he was particularly involved in the women's movement of the time and actively participated in suffrage. What do you know about his beliefs in that particular period?
Well, first of all, he even co-founded the suffrage atelier along with his sister. The atelier, its duty was mainly to produce any form of propaganda for the suffrage movement. So they produced banners and books and flyers and postcards, you name it. There's really a large variety of production they had. And he and his sister, they co-founded the suffrage atelier, and he was also a member of the Men's League for Suffrage movement, for women's suffrage. So he was very proactive, and he repeatedly contributed with his writing to the suffrage movement. He wrote a play, Pains and Penalties, that I mentioned earlier, but he also wrote articles for the official organs of the suffrage movement, especially of the suffragettes, like Votes for Women and later the Suffragette. I think he was, from our point of view today, you could call him a true ally to the suffrage movement. He was really what any feminist or female feminist would want a man to be in terms of feminism. Really supportive. He also did not make it his show, so he never put himself to the front, but he really was, he used his talents to support the women's cause.
I think, as you say, his involvement in the women's movement highlights just how influential his beliefs were during that transformative period, shall we call it. But shifting focus a little bit, let's have a look at some classic early 20th century plays now. Now, some historic, like, for example, Elizabeth the Queen, which I think you mentioned, which originally began on Broadway before heading to London. Why is that particular drama, or whatever you want to call it, a play, a favourite of yours?
I wouldn't call it a favorite of mine. It's not part of my plays that I've been looking at, but it's a very good example for the history play of the time, because with the interwar years, well, first of all, of course, history and history plays have always been popular within society, starting when we speak about England, starting with Shakespeare's time, when he set the example for a modern history play, and everybody followed his example. And well, they remained popular during all the centuries. But during the interwar years, we see a slight shift, because suddenly the audiences grew more, or the demand grew more strongly in the direction of wanting to see the private people behind these famous historical figures. And that's the shift you can see very well in the interwar plays. So suddenly Queen Elizabeth is still important as a ruler on stage, and it's always the most significant part about her is her devotion to England. But also there's suddenly this focus on her person, on the person behind the Queen. What drives her? What are her insecurities? This of course would also include romance, as it has done already in the 19th century. But yeah, there was a shift on the private life. I think that's also very well visible in Richard of Bordeaux, for example. And in that regard, it shows just how much historical reception or the changing of narratives in history can influence the way we view history. As you know, Richard II, he's not the most popular king in British history. And the narrative did not change the outcome of his reign. It also still showed the ways he went wrong as a king. But it also shows us a true person on that throne. So there's a private side to him, there's vulnerability, and that's often mentioned as one reason why the play was so successful to the interwar audience, because they could suddenly relate to this person. And that's what Do
you think that the plays even back then had a touch more entertainment than accuracy about them?
Not necessarily. There's always the question, or there's always this debate about how much creative license is allowed with historical drama and how much not. But the plays I've been looking at, all of them, or most of them, except for Will Shakespeare, but I'll talk about that in a minute, but basically all of them were very careful about historical accuracy. So the authors or the playwrights put a lot of effort and work into researching their historical subjects before writing about them, and to get it right, to make sure the events happened in the correct chronological order, to include other important figures at the time. Yes. Well, with the exception of Will Shakespeare, which was also called Will Shakespeare an Invention. So Dane already revealed in her title that she used a lot of creative license in her play. And while it still follows the overall traditional narrative of Shakespeare's life, like he started in Stratford-upon-Avon when he was discovered by Henslowe, then moved to London, and later on became this British icon. She invented a lot of the things in between, like his relationship with the Dark Lady, whom she interpreted to be Mary Fitton, who was a lady in waiting to Queen Elizabeth. And there was a theory at the time about Mary Fitton being the Dark Lady, which was by the time Dane wrote her play already proven wrong. But she used this creative license and liberty in her play, and still it was recognized as an historical play. It was criticized for its creativity, but that didn't really impact it in a negative way.
So, because a lot of today's modern historical dramas on TV obviously have that.
It's still the same today. Period dramas still have to find that balance between historical accuracy and being creative and being made for entertainment.
It's like, you watch an episode of any historical drama, it may go on for an hour, but in reality, that 1 hour that they've condensed could be a period of 5 years.
Exactly.
Because it's like nothing really happened, did it? In the Tudor time or whatever, nothing really happened. They didn't have mobile phones and access to news and everything like we do today at such speed. So it could have, it's condensed. So I suppose they have to make it a little bit entertaining. Otherwise, it would just be completely dull, I guess, wouldn't it? If you're trying to watch something. But let's move on to something else. And another lady you've talked about earlier. It's interesting, I guess, how certain iconic figures from the stage also continue to capture our imagination today. One person you were drawn to is Sarah Siddons, a Welsh actress who was once dubbed tragedy personified. What do you know about
that? About the nickname?
Yeah, why was she dubbed that?
Well, she was the tragic muse of her time. Sarah Siddons really stood out as a character actress for tragic roles, for tragic female roles, especially in context of Shakespearean plays. She even not reinvented, but she made Lady Macbeth, for example, her own character in a very unique way that nobody else had done before her time. So she stood out in that regard. Yeah. And that's basically also, I think, what draws me to her. That along with performativity. I feel like that is my term, how to describe Sarah Siddons would be. She's an icon of performativity because the way, as I mentioned earlier, the way she balanced her two personas, the professional actress and the devoted mother and wife, but she balanced both of them in the public. She had to constantly prove to the public that she is both, that she's not a fallen woman or a woman with no morals only because she's an actress, but she also had to show that she was a good actress. So she also had to put a lot of effort in her performances. She also continued to bring her family on stage, or at least to display her motherhood on stage, to emphasize that she had a good private life, that she was a good woman in a traditional sense as well. Yeah, that's really something. And that in the end, she managed to craft her image in a way that it would really last throughout the centuries to come. So, earlier this year, I've been to London and I've seen her Gainsborough portrait, or one of her Gainsborough portraits at the National Gallery. And yeah, I know seeing it in real life, it really struck me again just how impressive, how inventive or innovative she was for a woman of her time, and how outstanding.
From what I read, looking into her a little bit, she eventually became known as the undisputed Queen of Drury Lane, which is a magnificent status for any actress, even I guess in today's theatre land. It's a really big compliment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and still, something I also that also struck me about her. She also had this awareness of how hard she had to fight, only because she was a woman. So she wasn't fooled by any of her fame. She was very much aware of the discrimination her sex had to experience. For example, when her brother, Philip Campbell, he was also an actor, and he retired from stage a couple of years after she did. And in her memoirs, she remarks how much bigger the celebration that he got for his farewell performance in comparison to hers. And she remarked that it was only because he was a man and she was a woman. Which is quite striking to read a woman of the early 19th century say something like that. It's
a fascinating story. She's got it's an incredible background to it as well. Now, I'm going to move forward I'm going to ask you a personal question here. Mm-hmm. So if you could go back in time to witness a play in the early part of the 20th century, which one would it be?
I feel of the ones I've analyzed, I definitely would like to see Richard of Bordeaux, because I have a feeling that it was a very, very impressive performance. Only looking at the photographs that we have of the play, okay, they were staged photographs, but still looking at the costumes, and also the idea of getting to see a young John Gielgud and a young Gwen Franken Davies on stage together, it would be incredible. But I also would really love to see Will Shakespeare, because I was very fascinated by the creative license Dane took and how she still managed to turn it all into a brilliant play that would later be applauded by people like Bernard Shaw. I think these two.
Okay. So you'd be there I guess you'd be there on opening night then, wouldn't you, if you were going to go?
Yes.
You won't be waiting for a few months to for some seats to become available. You'd be there straight in.
Be the first in line.
First in line. Imagining, I guess, the energy and creativity of those early 20th century performances does offer a unique lens into that period. Shifting to a broader perspective then, it's important to consider how the lessons of the past can inform and strengthen movements today. For the feminist movement, which I know is central to your kind of discoveries, when you look at the world today, which one thing would make a real impact, in your opinion, on making A, the movement stronger, and B, safer for all women?
Yes, that's a very, very good question. I'm so sorry, but my cat wants to...
That's all right.
And get her out of the room.
Okay.
I'll be back in a minute. Yeah, that's... Okay. Sorry. Yeah, that's a very important question, a very big question, actually. And of course, I doubt there's a right answer, but I've been thinking about it. And for me, it really, what we can learn about when we look at the past and apply to the present, it really is that what we have to do is challenge patriarchy from the inside. I often feel that what we need is people to listen and to understand to feminism, to acknowledge it. But and I feel like especially men have to fight more, in my view, because it takes more than just to oh gosh, I feel like we have to cut this a bit.
Go
until I find the right words. Yeah, well, challenging patriarchy from within. So it has to be a collective effort. Everybody has to fight against it. And what's very important to me is that feminism shouldn't be a place where suddenly new forms of hate are generated, which is something that I feel has been happening a lot recently. We have hatred towards transgender people, for example. So we start to find new marginalized groups and try to exclude them in a way. Well, of course, not everybody does that. I'm not speaking about, I'm speaking to particular groups within feminism, of course, but which are still too strong. And my feeling is like that we end up copying patriarchy in a way, instead of breaking it, instead of establishing something new. So
there definitely has to be a respect for people, full stop, regardless of, race, creed, belief, colour, whatever you want to call it, sex even. There has to be a certain amount of respect. Whether you believe with everything that you're not going to believe everybody that tells you certain things, but there's no reason for not still having a respect as a human being. And I think that's probably what you're trying to say there, isn't it?
Yes, it's one part. So definitely there has to be an openness and an acceptance towards discrimination based on different aspects like gender, like sex. It shouldn't be brushed off. Now she's meowing on the other side.
Right.
I'm going to leave her. She'll be fine. No, yeah. I try to think about it in an everyday context. And I still, as a woman, I often feel like I think too often, or I consider too often whether it's worth it now making my point or pointing out that something is unfair, which is probably down to my sex. And I feel like that is something we have to overcome. And of course, it has to be overcome through education, to safe spaces for women in public and also in private. But in generally, with the mindset of people.
Do you think social media's got a lot to do with the hatred that's going around? Because people seem quite easily to sit behind a computer screen or the phone and literally type whatever they want, regardless whether, and without even having any idea of that ripple effect of it's not necessarily the one person you're writing to, but it's a big group of people, because that ripple, it's like a family, isn't it? If you ever if something happens to a member of your family, and somebody makes a really bad comment, that can have that ripple effect throughout the whole family, causing more, problems and stuff. And I don't think people kind of understand when they write in some of these comments how tasteless at times, they actually are. And I think that's one of the problems.
Definitely. It's far too easy to share your unfiltered and uninformed thoughts on social media. And the temptation to just do that because it's so easy, because all I have to do is type it into my phone, hit send, and then it's out there. I think that's a danger for society in social media. I also see a lot of advantages in social media when it comes to connecting with other people and also sharing opinions. And especially if you think about countries that are in dire straits, in war zones, for example, social media is very important for them to reach out to the rest of the world. But on the other side, it's of course very easy to misuse social media. And definitely feminism is an area which has suffered from social media just as much as it has profited. But
it's something that's it's going to carry on and carry on. I'm afraid there's no real cure, because people have so many different thoughts and there's different views on things. It's just one of those. I think you have to accept it, kind of brush it to one side and just try and move on. It's not nice, but I think that's unless there's actual laws in place that stop people, producing language that's distasteful and not really recommended. I don't know what else you could do, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I want to say that the answer lies with education, but as somebody coming from an educational system, so I've trained as a teacher and I've worked as a teacher, and I've been in situations where I have experience teaching children, teenagers about the responsibility one carries when using social media and how to think about the long-term effects of what you do on social media, how you present yourself. And I feel like saying education is the answer is way too simple. It's way too simple, because you can't rest all the responsibility on people working in the educational sector, especially since it's so difficult to. It's like fighting windmills sometimes.
It comes from parenting as well, doesn't it? You can't you can't just put on education.
It's also down to peers, like people watching out for their friends, their social groups, which would be important. It's also down to the public itself. I mean, we have politicians who use social media just as stupidly.
Yeah.
Teenagers do. So.
In fact, some politicians, you could call them teenagers, couldn't you? So it's just the way it is. Anyway, it's almost time for the curtain to fall. But I've got one more thing to ask you. before we do decide to call it a day. It's time to talk about everything Vivian. So, what does the future hold? Have you got any social media sites where people can find out more about yourself or about the theatre or anything in general?
Yes, I have a channel on Instagram, so you can follow me on Vivian Colbert, or at Vivian Colbert on Instagram. I'm posting about my research on there, but also about everyday history that I come across in my life. So it's a bit of a mix between my professional and private life as a historian. It's not too private though. So my next thing, or what I'm working at the moment, is of course getting my PhD thesis out to the public, publishing it. But I'm also working on a podcast myself about the history of actresses, where I want to go back to antiquity and move on through the centuries until our present day, look at how the profession has changed for women, and also introducing the public to a variety of famous actresses. So if you follow me, you will get updates on that as well.
I'm sure people will follow you. I'm sure they will. It's really interesting stuff.
It'd be very nice, yeah.
It's really interesting. Anyway, Vivian, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your wealth of knowledge about the early 20th century theatre, and obviously much more besides. Your passion and expertise have truly brought this fascinating era to life, from the groundbreaking performances to the cultural shifts that have shaped the stage, and it's been an absolute delight hearing your insights. And I'm sure our audience will walk away with a greater appreciation for the history of theatre. So thanks so much for taking the time to share your stories with us.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving me this opportunity to speak about my research.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And as always, to everyone who's tuned in, thank you so much. We've still got some more incredible guests coming on History Speaks. So if you love history, you'll love History Roadshow. And don't forget to like, which is one of those, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our historical stories. And until next time, keep exploring the past, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.